So I honestly think that John Tavares to Chicago Blackhawks makes a ton of sense for all three parties. For Chicago Blackhawks, for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and for John Tavares. I'm going to go into detail as to why I think that's the case. So obviously for Toronto's perspective, they clear off $11 million in cap space. That's a big thing. They would lose a very good player in John Tavares. They lose their captain. I'm a huge John Tavares fan. I think he's been great. I still think he's playing at like an $8.5 million a year type of player. 8 million, 8.5. So he's still a very good player. But when we have Marner, Matthews, Nylander all signed for over $11 million next year, moving off John Tavares for $11 million would be wise. At least moving off him or one of Mitch Marner, one of those two. But in this scenario for John Tavares going to Chicago, I think this would be a great scenario for the Leafs because it opens up that cap space and then they can fill in a proper second line center. Because right now, John Tavares, we don't need an $11 million second line center. We can do a $7 million second line center, and then that extra $4 million can go into our defense and to fill out the rest of our roster. So for the Leafs, makes sense. As for Chicago, why this makes sense for Chicago? First of all, his cap hit is $11 million, but after July 1st, on July 1st, I believe it's July 1st, he gets paid his signing bonus. So on July 1st, he gets paid his signing bonus, and his signing bonus is just over $7 million. So his base salary, his salary beyond that is $910,000. His cap hit is $11 million. But if this trade were to be done after a signing bonus would be paid, Chicago would only have to pay him $910,000 for the year. So they get $11 million cap hit, but only have to pay $910,000. So that's actually huge for Chicago because they're like, we don't need to pay. First of all, they're not up against the cap, so they don't care about the cap space. Second of all, $910,000 for a player that's going to be great for them. And why John Tavares makes sense for Chicago is he would just be another great veteran support system for Bedard, for their second overall pick, for guys like Korchinski. They have a really young group of players forming right now. So they need to put as much support systems as possible. That's why they signed Perry. Clearly didn't work out. That's why they signed Foligno. That's why they traded for Taylor Hall. So getting another guy like John Tavares into that mix would be super beneficial for them. And John Tavares is amazing at faceoffs. He would provide a lot of stability at center, and he'd be a great mentor for a guy like Bedard. He's a first overall pick too, so he fully understands the pressure of what it is to be a first overall pick, so he can really help mentor the kids there as well. So for John Tavares, if I'm Kyle Davidson of the Chicago Blackhawks, I probably have already called Brad Treliving to try and make this happen, and be like, we'll just take him on. We won't give you anything in return. It'll be a future considerations package, but we'll take him on. And then I would be starting to work on John Tavares to see if I can make that work. What I would do is I would trade for him. I would give him the captaincy, and I would extend him for 2 or 3 years. Kind of give him a $6 million package, $6 million for 2 or 3 years, give him the captaincy. So then that burden isn't put on Connor Bedard immediately. Connor Bedard in 3 years from now, he can put the C on. He can wear the C, but in that meantime, you give it to John Tavares, and you can help that team grow and build properly with good leadership. You have him as a captain, you would have Foligno as an assistant. I could see this making a ton of sense for Chicago, especially because I think they could get him for free, basically. As for John Tavares, why this could work for him, this would be the hardest of the three people to sell on of the groups. Clearly, he loves Toronto. We clearly have him in pajamas, saying that he just loves Toronto and him as a kid. He signed this deal. He has a full no movement clause, so this would need to be on him. The benefits for John Tavares is change of scenery. Clearly, things haven't gone well in Toronto. And he would be able to get to play with Connor Bedard and really help grow and build that program there. We'll see if he has an extension or not. Both scenarios work. If there's no extension, he could potentially be moved at the trade deadline to a competitor, so he could still have the opportunity to compete. And in the scenario he gets extended, those last few years, there's a chance that Chicago could actually be competing in that time frame, but he could really be helping to build that program in Chicago. And in life, there's so much to be said about being wanted. If there's a scenario, if Toronto no longer wants to have John Tavares on the team, and Chicago's calling him and being like, we want you. There's so much that can't be understated, how much it is as a human being to be valued and to be wanted, right? It's like, go where you're celebrated, go where you're wanted. So if Toronto's trying to move off Tavares, I'm not too sure if they are or not. And Kyle Davidson in Chicago are really pushing for him. I could see that also playing into this factor quite a bit. So yeah, John Tavares to Chicago. I think this makes a ton of sense for all three parties. Am I crazy? Let me know in the comments. Brian the Leafs guy, out. And I'll be back on Saturday with my regular scheduled video. This is a bonus video. So much love.